As much as what's happening now may seem dark and bleak in the middle of the events, I do think it's creating a one-in-time opportunity for us to put a lot of the history behind us and move forward.
I always think of you as some kind of boy wonder, who hit all these milestones at such a young age,
Everyone at the end of the day gets biased to what worked for them. And I'm very biased towards what worked for me so far for the last kind of 14 years, which is open every door. And I'll continue for people to come in and say, hey, let's do that together. We don't remember instructions and bullet points and numbers. We remember everything told through a story.
This episode is brought to you by EFG Hermes One, your one app for investing in more than 35 stock markets worldwide. Welcome back to What I Did Next from A&T Media. I'm Malak Fuad. I sit down with a new guest each month and we look at their lives' most consequential and pivotal moments. Today I'm joined by Youssef Salem, who is CFO of ADNOC Drilling in Abu Dhabi. ADNOC is the UAE's primary oil company and it's the 12th largest in the world in terms of production. I've been following Youssef for quite a while now, and I've wanted him on the show for a very long time. In addition to his amazing accomplishments in terms of his career, he's just a great role model for young people in the region. This is the first of 2 episodes with Youssef, and in the first part, we talk about his early career and his milestones. We also talk about the impact of the Iran war on his sector and on the UAE. In the second part of the interview, we look at more specifically the oil and gas sector, but Youssef and I also spent some time talking about crisis management and how they came through the Iran war. You texted me a couple of weeks ago to tell me that you were going to have dinner with Bobby Chin and that you had listened to his interview and that you were a big fan of his.
To his 2 interviews with you, I think you interviewed him twice and both were incredible. So
I did.
So I've been a fan of Bobby for 4 years, watching Top Chef Middle East. And then I got introduced to a friend of his, Juan. We were chatting, and then I did tell him that I'm a fan, and he's like, "This was one of my best friends. Let me actually get you to a dinner at his place, cooked by him in Cairo." So a couple of weeks back, we did that. He cooked. He did quails. He did a bunch of things.
I hadn't realized it was in Cairo.
It was in Cairo. It's actually very special because this is the house of his grandfather, who used to be the leader of the armed forces of Egypt in 1973. So it's a very special place with very special memories of the kind of the October 1973 war and all the portraits and the memories. It's actually a very, very special and historical place.
Amazing. He's such a great guy and he's a great storyteller. I hope he entertained you with some of his stories.
He did. So I was very entertained on your podcast with him with the story about how he was going through this potential airplane crash.
Sitting next to me is my childhood friend's wife, Lydia. And we both had realized at least 10 years before this that both of us had this conversation that we both think we're going to die on an airplane.
Oh, wow. That's very dark, Bobby.
Of course it's dark.
Wow.
To tell you, it's like,
oh my God.
You can't appreciate life.
I have a fear of flying, so this is really uncomfortable.
Lydia's about to go to hit the Valium. And this is where the part of, never knowing if believing is a blessing or a truth.
Yeah.
And I look at her and I'm like, before you take that Valium, let me convert you to Islam. So easy. Just in case. I convert her and I'm sitting there. It starts to hit me. And all of a sudden my body relaxes. I feel ecstasy from my fingers to my toes. And I feel love like I've never felt before. And I see pictures that I've not seen. I've never seen them ever again, but they just start coming to me.
What?
There's a picture of me in the Golden Gate Park with my sister. I was dressed up as a Cub Scout.
So from your childhood, they like flashes of your childhood coming back at you.
And then the next minute, smash, crash, and all of a sudden, we're skidding on the air, And David's like, what were you thinking about? I was feeling love. What were you thinking about? He says, I was thinking I was going to die next to Michael, You're sitting next to my wife,
It's a great story.
It's a great story. Especially that it's a true story, right?
And he's had a really colorful life. I mean, he's done so many different types of things. So
I think for me, I always find people who have this both sides of the brain, who's like, he's been a banker, he's like into the numbers, he knows his things, facts and figures, but then is the most creative storyteller, cook, artistic person. Having kind of both sides of the brain equally, like, it's very impressive.
Yeah, I agree with you. I listened to a really interesting interview with you last night. a young guy called Tamer. I think it was done end of 24. And he was very thorough with the things that impact you and, the kind of advice you can provide people entering business today. And so I found that interview really interesting. But I'm curious to know, what kind of a household were you raised in? Because I always think that's an interesting thing to think about. And I think we underestimate the impact of that because, you're a very driven person, a very ambitious person, and I'm very much in awe of that. Was that something your parents encouraged in you, or is that just your character? I mean, what were your parents like with you? How were you raised?
You're too kind. I absolutely agree. I think I do fully agree with the statement that everyone is a product of their environment. Both my parents are professors. So by definition, you kind of start with there's a certain expectation and you kind of follow through on that expectation. Both of them, my dad is a professor of economics. My mom is a professor of statistics. So kind of getting your numbers right and getting the facts and figures and kind of being
You
very
were
quantitatively
indoctrinated
driven.
in the world of numbers from a young age.
Exactly. And you learn that, look, now the numbers are the facts, right? My brother is kind of 3 years older and he was kind of a swimming champion at top of his school, etc. So you just kind of grow up where the only thing you know with your parents and with your older brother is you've got to perform and deliver and achieve it because there's kind of no other path. So I think that definitely kind of played a massive role. And then even kind of a little bit further, kind of as I meet my wife in the first semester of university, both of her parents are also professors. She's also top of her class. So you continue to operate within a family where kind of education comes before anything, and then kind of commitment and performance is paramount.
So it was a world of nerds and geeks, in the best
100%.
possible sense of the word.
100%. I think that's why it's great what you mentioned about Bobby, about his storytelling, yet having come from a banking finance background. Like, for me, there's absolutely no contradiction. You can be as artistic as you want and be a storyteller and develop all of these great communication skills, but they still need to be based on a very strong foundation of absolute knowledge and education. It cannot, like, storytelling has to be content that's told as a story, but it cannot just be fluff.
And I also think, Youssef, going on from that, you cannot tell the story of a company. If you are not a good storyteller, then the message will not get through.
Absolutely.
The two are absolutely connected. And you're very, very good at that. You're very good at the communication part. And I think maybe this is a product of today's world where everything is so rapid and so online and so immediate. You have to master that skill.
No, absolutely. I think, as you said, you've got to kind of put your kind of audience hat on and then work backwards from what captivates an audience. And stories is what captivates audience. I was listening to a podcast where they were making a great point. They were saying, even look at religions, look at our kind of holy book as the Quran. It's not a set of instructions. It did not tell you, be kind, be just. It came with stories of prophets, etc. And from the stories you infer that kind of when God says in the Quran, will give you the best of the stories, and He gives you a story of Prophet Joseph, He outlines a story from the beginning to the end, and then you learn about your relationships with your brothers. You learn about being honest, about being just from the story, and that's how we remember it. We don't remember instructions and bullet points and numbers. We remember everything told through a story.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So you provided me with a few pivot points. And I found it really interesting that all of the pivots you sent me were from very, very early on in your life. We have just come out of the war with Iran, and hopefully we've seen the back of it. Hopefully it will not reignite. But I wonder if you look back in a year or two and you will look at that war as a pivot point for you. And I think having lived through it, being physically in the UAE during this time, it is certainly going to be a pivot point that you will mark down the line.
Absolutely, in multiple ways. First of all, we walked into these events, yes, with a lot of harmony between UAE nationals and expats in the UAE, but they were still nationals and expats. We walked out of these events as one. If you look at the entire address of the leadership of the UAE, it's talking about people who consider the UAE home. It's talking to people of the UAE, to the first family and the second family. that ability of everyone to come together has changed the face of the UAE, and I think the entirety of the Gulf for a very long time, hopefully forever, because of the solidarity and people coming together. I think that's one. Two is there was always this overhang of people saying these expats in the Gulf, at the end of the day, they're transient. They will go back. If there's a crisis, they leave. And the fact that we've all stuck here and stayed throughout, and we will always stay throughout what happens, I think that also has completely changed both how we think about ourselves, how people think about us, how everyone interacts together. Third is just how resilient the Gulf is, right? For you to be able, and specifically the UAE, for you to be able to operate business as usual. Today, for example, in my company, ADNOC Drilling, our share price on the exchange today is higher than pre the events. And it was higher throughout most of the events. So that level of resilience.
I want to just stop you, Youssef. Why was it higher?
What the investors realized is, look, if this is a company that even effectively in the middle of a war where the UAE is receiving 60% of all the attacks on all countries in the war, and still be able to go out, which we have done proactively, and reiterate that we will still meet our financial guidance for the quarter, then effectively, what can go wrong? Because this company has now been through COVID, has now been through the 12-day war, and now has been through a direct attack. And throughout all of this country and this company and these people are still being able to deliver. So what ends up happening is, in a counterintuitive way, instead of the risk premium going up, it almost actually goes down, because people are like, every single risk I was worried it may happen, it actually happened, and these guys still deliver.
It reinforced the message that the UAE had been delivering all along, which is we're fine, we're safe, we're open for business.
Exactly.
And we're, and obviously the share price reflected that.
Exactly.
Very interesting. Yeah. I also think what's really interesting is, and I think that the UAE came out a winner, is that the UAE had never been tested before fundamentally in its history. And this was the first big test, and it won with flying colors on every level. Protecting citizens, protecting expats in the same way. And that is a fundamentally unbelievably reassuring thing for people who are living there, who are thinking of coming, who want to come back, whatever it might be. I have so many friends who live there, and some did leave because they had young children and they had a vacation, and so they left. But all they could think about was, when are we going home? When are we going home? And it's really a testament to the life that has been created there, that people are, cheering for the country. I mean, on every level.
Absolutely. I think I have an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old. We've stayed throughout. Actually, we were planned to go back to Egypt for Eid. We cancelled it because we were worried that if we go back for vacation, maybe the flights are affected, so we're not able to go back promptly. So we actually ended up staying. And the kids were absolutely great. And on your point about kind of they protected citizens and expats the same way, absolutely. But even if you look at the numbers, they ended up protecting 1 million citizens and 9 million expats, which means kind of almost a disproportionate amount of area coverage and protection is being provided for expats. So it's astonishing.
What do you think will be the changes that the UAE puts in place? What are the lessons learned from this?
I think one of the points the UAE has made very clear that it really appreciates a lot of countries that have really stepped up and stepped in and provide a lot of support. And this is something the UAE has constantly reiterated appreciation for. And I think we continue to see more deeper relationships with a lot of countries globally, which is also great for business and economics because it creates more opportunities. To give you an example, I just came back from a week in China. And there was a kind of a state visit at the highest level from the UAE to China. And when this happens, it's not only diplomatic, it also opens a lot of economics and business opportunities for UAE companies. So kind of deeper global integration with countries supporting and stepping up opens also a lot of business opportunities for us. And second, as you mentioned, this harmony locally will become ever bigger. And obviously there will also be industrial growth, because with every events like this, that reiterates the importance for kind of national security around local supply chain of food, of medicine, of energy, of industries. So with every situation like this, you come out with more industrial activity, supply chain, local business building that business and individuals will benefit from.
And deeper integration anyway between the two countries as a whole. That just definitely happens. Yeah, yeah. I want to go back, Youssef. Let's go back for a second and look at the pivots that you sent me. So I'm fascinated by one of them, which is that you met your wife at such a young age at university, and that you decided to get married so young. You got married at 20, right?
Yes.
How does anyone get married at 20? Explain this to me. I'm fascinated.
I think I got lucky in so many ways. I think first I got lucky that I met kind of the best person in the world. So I think that kind of allowed me to get that in done very quickly. Second is we met at 17. So I think that still allowed us to have kind of 3 years together before we got married. So kind of even by 20, we had been together for 3 years. And third is really kind of now in hindsight, when I look at kind of at that now, that is kind of it's 14, 15 years later, it's kind of absolutely the best thing that ever happened, because it kind of provides you a kind of an incredible support throughout that's consistent. Sort of no matter what happens, you always have that pillar of support that's there. And then you share your entire life and memories and basically changes and personality growth with one person. So then effectively you look at that person now and you've just kind of grown together. You've been through everything together. The
But it's
personalities was shaped
amazing,
together.
Youssef, that you, especially the men more than the women, that you felt mature enough to do that. I mean, I have a son who's 21, and we're not there at all.
Yeah. So when I proposed, I was 18. Was basically the kind of the third semester of university. And my parents were in London visiting my brother, who was living in London at the time. And then I kind of called them and said, guys, when you come back, I want to go propose, because this is 2011, right, in Egypt. So you don't propose by kind of kneeling down. You propose by going
Yeah,
to
of
the
course.
with the parents.
But it was
to the
also revolution. Third semester, you were in
Yeah.
the revolution.
So actually, I proposed on the 27th of Jan. So it was after the revolution has started on 25th, and the day before the lines got cut off on the 28th. So we proposed on 27th evening, and then the telephone was cut on the 28th.
Wow, Youssef, that's amazing. Amazing story. I'm assuming that you were the first of your friends group, right? And probably for
Yes,
many
yes.
years, you were the only ones married, right?
Correct, which was also great because it meant we had the first wedding. And you know what kind of the first wedding means for a group of friends. And then it also means later we end up having kind of the first kid effectively. It's kind of the first time for anyone in the friends group to effectively be an uncle in a way.
Yeah.
So it kind of created for a lot of incredible milestones after that.
It tells me also from that story that you must be a very decisive person. I don't think you're someone who hesitates. When you know, right?
Correct. You know, I'm always very inspired by something our prophet said. He said basically when he was inviting people to Islam, he said everyone I invited to Islam had a second of thought, except Abu Bakr, the kind of the first caliph after the prophet. He said when I invited him, he just said yes. There was no hesitation, there was no thought, there was no sleeping on it. And it always got me thinking that, look, even if you say yes to someone, but after having thought about even for 1 minute, 5 minutes, even if you said yes, the person will always remember and the situation will always be that you thought, you weren't 100% sure. But as when you say yes on the spot immediately, it just drives a completely different momentum to any relationship you enter into or any deal or any business transaction. So for me, unless I really, really, really need to think about something or consult, if I have the facts clear, I just go for it.
Stay tuned. After the break, there's a lot more from Youssef and I. This episode is brought to you by EFG Hermes One, your one app for investment across more than 35 stock markets worldwide. With EFG Hermes One, you can buy and sell orders in real time for immediate execution across multiple global markets. You can keep track of your favorite stocks by creating and customizing multiple watch lists, and make informed investment decisions with their advanced technical analysis tools to study market trends and investor behavior. So supercharge your financial journey and download the EFG Hermes One app on the Apple App Store and on Google Play and start investing today. So I know you spent 8 years working in investment banking. And from that, you jumped into the startup world with Swivel, who were actually one of your clients at the time. And one thing I'm not very clear on, though, Youssef, is you remained with your bank, Wallace, right?
Yes, when I got the call from Mustafa, the founder of Swivel, saying, hey, we've got the term sheet. to effectively go public on Nasdaq, and I want you with me on this on this journey. And I told them absolutely yes. So I called Rami, who's my head of investment banking at Moelis in Dubai, to say, hey Rami, I'll kind of resign to pursue this dream. So he's like, okay, let me make a phone call and call you back. So he spoke to Yurek, who used to head our Europe, Middle East, and Africa business out of London, and Eric Cantor, who's the vice chairman of Moelis globally. And they said, okay, instead of basically him just totally quitting, let him convert it into a part-time senior advisory role, so he can remain part of the system. So effectively, I became kind of full-time CFO of Swivel, and next to it, a part-time senior advisor to Moelis.
The way that they allowed you to do both, is that common? Or is that something that's quite unique? I've never heard of that before.
It's a bit unique. Typically the Moelis senior advisory role or senior advisor role in banking in general, it's typically for people who almost retire. So kind of they're at the end of their life in the bank. They're now effectively, instead of retiring, they move into a part-time. And then maybe next to it, they have some other board positions, some other advisory positions. But to be doing it, obviously, at that point in time, it was also a bit funny because the title was senior advisor, but I was 29, right? So kind of in no way I was senior in any form. So it was kind of more of just kind of a way that they created this creatively to allow the relationship to continue.
I always think of you as some kind of boy wonder, who hit all these milestones at such a young age, and here we are, you're 44, 45, and you have this massive resume that you sent me, and I'm thinking he must be 70 or something,
I'm 34.
You're 34. Wow. Okay. Even more of a boy wonder. Even more. That's funny. Yeah. So are you someone who generally has a long-term plan when you look at your career, or do you judge an opportunity that is in front of you, make a decision, and see where things will take you, and you'll react from thing to thing? Or do you have in your head, you're 34, by 50, I'm going to be in this place?
I kind of never really had a plan. In university, I took a business writing course. It happened that Professor Robert Hoth, I'm very grateful for, said we'll effectively make this a simulation where you write kind of a CV. And effectively as a professor, I act as a mock interviewer. So I did that, effectively utilizing an internship I found on the career advisory placement services in the American University in Cairo. So this was an internship at Q Invest in Qatar. I finished the course. Yumna, my wife, kind of my fiance at the time, said, why don't you actually apply? Given you've done all the work. I applied. She actually helped. She took the documents, went to the business writing center in AUC, got them polished. I used them to apply. Kind of after applying with them, I got the internship. From the internship, they gave me a full-time offer. Then when I was at Q Invest in Qatar, because I've done a bit of credit work, Moelis wanted someone with credit experience. So I got that call. Then from Moelis, Swivel was a client of Moelis. ADNOC was another client of Moelis. So it all happened naturally. So I kind of completely opportunistic. I just stay open. I say yes to every opportunity. I jump on everything and then just let it happen.
I think that's the key, right? You make your destiny, but you're open to things when they appear as well.
Absolutely.
I think that's how I think of your career.
The kind of the advice of people say of like, you have to learn how to say no. For me, it's how you have to learn how to keep saying yes, 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 yes. And that's kind of what made my career, just saying yes at every juncture.
Yeah, yeah. Tell me, Youssef, just thinking of that, you do a lot of media, right? You do a lot of interviews, you put yourself out there. Is that something that you do? Obviously, you're doing it consciously, but what I mean is that something that you do? Well, why do you do that? I mean, it's not a required part of your job, I'm assuming, right?
It's for many reasons. So one, yes, I absolutely love it. Second is I do believe that once people become familiar with you to a certain level and you almost become part of their lives and of their daily lives, then that kind of is a very, very strong thing. Third is I do believe I have a lot of messages I want to get across. Both when it comes to the corporate, where, as you said at the beginning, it's all about storytelling. People don't engage anymore with corporate cold brands. People want to engage with human voices. And also on a personal level, where I do believe I have very specific messages I want to get about how someone can keep their values and faith and ethics and religion, and at the same time be very pragmatic and transactional and kind of and career driven. And you can absolutely balance the two, and there's zero contradiction between the two. If anything, they reinforce each other.
You had a really great interaction with Tamer on the podcast that I mentioned to you earlier. And you talked about FOMO and how good it is to have FOMO. Explain it to our listeners, because I love this line, because normally people, are embarrassed when they have FOMO. They don't want to admit it, but you say it's actually a really good thing.
Look, again, I'm inspired by our Prophet. There is a saying that the Prophet has not left a single person in Mecca where he lived, and has not left a single Arab delegation that has come from any other city or tribe to visit the Kaaba, because he could never know, he could never guess who would convert and who wouldn't. You can never know which meeting, which deal, which conference, which exhibition you will meet someone in. At the end of the day, yes, sure, you can analyze, but it's only probabilities. But at the end of the day, until I come to this podcast with you, Malak, and until we do it and publish it, I cannot know for a certain what's going to come out of this podcast. We're going to build a relationship. We're going to become great friends. We're going to do other things together. Someone will listen to this podcast. There's an idea we will say that will inspire someone to do something. You just cannot factually pre-predict that. And that's why effectively this fear that there was something there that you do not pursue drives you to pursue every single opportunity. And then it only becomes about prioritization. So only if you have two events running at the same time in the same hour, and they are far enough physically that you cannot split your time between the two, then you have to sit and objectively assess which one to visit. But as long as you can humanly do half an hour in the first one, then commute to the second one and still do both, you should do both.
I love that, Youssef. I think that's the big soundbite out of this interview. And I'm sending it to my son, Ali. This is going straight to his inbox. He needs to hear this. Don't miss anything, basically. Go to everything.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right, because you never know when that magic will happen, and you can never predict the chance meeting you have at a conference, the chance meeting you have at a dinner. You never know. You can never make that assessment. It's never going to fall down to an algorithm to tell you. You have to do it yourself, and it's a human existence at the end of the day.
Exactly.
What's next for you? Do you see yourself down the line starting your own business? I mean, I would think that would be a natural progression for you. What's coming up for you? How do you see the next 10 years, for example?
Look, in terms of starting my own business, the way I think about it is today, obviously, ADNOC have been super supportive for me to also be able to pursue a lot of things that do not conflict with my role with ADNOC in terms of some of these podcasts, some of the board roles, advisory roles, etc. And hence today I'm able to kind of do so much, right? So if I today kind of find, okay, there's one thing I'm so passionate about, and I think I can really make an impact, and I think I don't see someone else doing it, so I think there's a gap in the market that I can go and pursue it, then I'll do that. But I'm not obsessed with trying to kind of open my own business for the sake of doing it. So for now, I'm kind of very content with being able to kind of do multiple things. So for me, for next is opening again as many doors as possible. So I want to continue to really deliver on my kind of role with ADNOC, and kind of continue to push boundaries on that, to continue to position myself in that space, continue to do more content, more kind of the different types of work I do, the work in the technology. Everyone at the end of the day gets biased to what worked for them. And I'm very biased towards what worked for me so far for the last kind of 14 years, which is basically opening doors, and then someone comes in through that. And hence, by definition, I will continue to do the same. Maybe someone else who has drawn a certain plan, it has went well, they will become biased to kind of planning for the next milestone. So what I'll do is I'll continue to pursue every opportunity, open every door, and I'll continue for people to come in and say, hey, let's do that together.
Interesting. I also think that we're at the beginning of the AI revolution, and I think watching a little bit from a distance is a smart move. Being engaged with it, but not jumping in at the beginning. If we look at the internet boom, because I worked at that time, I was already working within that field. And the boom followed the bust, but then the industry stabilized and became a foundation to everything we do today. But I think it would be interesting to just be a spectator for a while, being involved but not being part of it right now, and seeing where things end up?
Yes, I think in general, ideally, you always have two directions, right? You have one direction, you're doing something that you're committed to, kind of you have very high confidence in, you're not constantly changing, you're committed for an amount of time. And that thing you want to really be sure before you embark on a journey. And that can be, it's a full-time job. It can be that you're starting your own business. It can be that you're dedicating 100% of your time to something. And then you always want to have another experimentation track where you're trying different things are failing, you're making mistakes, things are working, not working. And that can be either you're reading, you're doing side gigs, you're doing some content, you're playing with something on your own, you're building with AI. So as long as you keep your experimentation to the second track and fail as many times as you'd like, and try to kind of be very thoughtful and thorough and intentional about your first track.
I think that's wonderful advice, actually. Youssef, that was lovely. I'm going to jump into the lightning round.
Let's do it.
If you had 25 hours in a day, what would you do with your extra hour?
I would work one more hour.
No, Youssef, don't say that. Would you really?
I believe we are ultimately in a race. At the end of the day, the way the Chinese got to where they are, they worked more. Plain and simple, right? We can talk about technology, about AI, about work smart. At the end of the day, they worked harder. And in 40 years, they developed an economic miracle where they went from a 90% plus poverty to a 0% poverty. There are no shortcuts. We just need to work harder than everyone else, put in more hours than everyone else.
Networking or Netflix?
Networking for sure.
Looking ahead, what is something that excites you about the future?
The region. I think as much as what's happening now may seem dark and bleak in the middle of the events, I do think it's creating a one-in-time opportunity for us to put a lot of the history behind us and move forward. If you look at what happened in Syria 18 months ago, Syria has effectively moved out and effectively moving forward. If you look at what's happening in Lebanon today, it is very, very sad. It is extremely sad what happened to Lebanon, and it's extremely kind of heartbreaking seeing the images. But you also can't help but think that seems to be just the bleakest moment right before a breakthrough from the past and into its own kind of national sovereign economy that can open up and trade globally without being derailed or used by anyone else.
I have also a hopeful feeling, very, very similar to you. If you look ahead, also, what are the things that concern you about the future, about our region or even further away?
I think we're underestimating the impact of AI on employment until now. It is going to be, I think the world's going to look entirely different. It's going to look as a world where the vast majority of work is being done by machines and AI agents. We're going to have extremely high levels of unemployment. And then I think countries need to do a ton of work now preparing for what does a universal basic income look like. What are people going to do with all of that free time? How do you kind of manage social dynamics within a much lower employment world? I don't think we have ever seen before lived through the level of kind of unemployment and underemployment world we'll go through. And I'm not sure that socially, culturally, economically, we are prepared for that yet.
Are we cushioned a little bit from that in our part of the world? I'm thinking of places like Egypt and Africa, where that technological leap hasn't happened yet, where there are parts of our region which are still dating to the pharaohs, the way people are living. Does that allow for a bit of a cushion from this issue?
It makes it even worse. If you look at back on the industrial side, at some point, Egypt has higher industrialization than effectively. At the end of the World War I, Egypt was more industrialized than Russia. And effectively, at the end of World War II, Egypt was more industrialized than Korea. You look at where kind of the Soviet Union then became and Russia and where Korea became today. When we got left behind in industrial, not only did we not benefit, we ended up importing all our products, and then we ended up living forever in currency problems and inflation problems because of imported industry. If we don't build our own technology, we will have the worst of both worlds. We will lose the jobs that technology replaces, and we'll also not have the technology jobs creating the technology. We will become an importer and consumer of technology that replaces people, so we end up with the worst of both worlds.
I see that. If you had to choose another profession, what would it be?
I would work in media.
But you are already working in media.
I would work in media full time.
Full time, okay. What is your favorite activity?
Being with kids, and if it's by myself, it's reading.
What do you like to read? What kind of material?
Economic history, mostly. So trying to kind of understand how we got to where we are today. What are the different economic models that exist? Because if you look at kind of the world today, we live in a hyper-capitalistic world and a hyper-individualistic world, right? And that has created very high prosperity levels at the top, but effectively it has eroded the middle class and has created extreme poverty at the bottom. And the other models that have tried to kind of solve for that issue historically in the recent history around socialism, communism, etc., have completely failed. And hence, until now, we have very limited real economic models that work across all levels. The Nordic countries with their social capitalism are the kind of the closest to achieving something that works, but it's still not perfect. So I think trying to kind of continuously read about countries and about economic history and finding what sort of economic model can give us that moderate third way compared to hyper-capitalism and neoliberalism from one side and between communism and socialism and other leftist models from the other side. I think for me, that's kind of the main interest.
And do you think that the tigers of the 1980s, like Malaysia, Singapore, Korea, when we were apart, I'm thinking of Egypt, we were equal to them in the 80s. And then, of course, they went so much ahead of us. Are those models to emulate?
Correct. Each one of them, we have to get something from them. Obviously, for example, let's say the Singaporean model, that's more a helpful benchmark for Dubai or the Gulf, because when you have a very small country, it's completely different from having a big country like Egypt, where you also have to deal with a lot of demographic and social consideration. But there are definitely things you can, for example, you can use Singapore as a model to build your Suez area around the maritime industry on the Singapore model. So in every country you have, for example, from Korea, you want to take the industrialization, how they built their Samsungs, etc. So kind of nothing, you cannot copy and paste, obviously, because the demographics are always different, the social, the history is different, but there's absolutely kind of individual learnings you need to get and then kind of bundle it together in the way that works for Egypt or for any country.
So we looked at your favorite activity. What's your least favorite activity?
To be honest, you mentioned watching. You mentioned like Netflix or like watching. To be honest, I'm not. I'd rather definitely read, unless it's like I like true story stuff to watch. But generally, I much prefer to kind of to read than to watch because I can control my own pace.
And do you read or do you listen to audiobooks?
I prefer reading because I prefer to be able to skim and then read again and then skim again. So I kind of prefer to be fully in control of what I read.
Yeah. So last 2 points. I'm going to begin a sentence and I want you to finish it, please. I have a hard time
having direct conversations or confrontations, etc. So I don't like to have any direct conversation with anyone.
So conflict. You don't like conflict.
Yeah.
Okay. So what do you do about it? You avoid it or what?
Yeah, I avoid it. And then again, it's something that's obviously that I wouldn't advise kind of people to do because you kind of sometimes need to issues, but it's just not my personality. I just cannot do it. I cannot get myself to do it. So I do avoid it. And it creates issues, but I just rather kind of live with these issues than just live with the conflict.
Fair enough. Last question or last point. I get joy from
other people being joyful. Like for me, it's contagious when I'm around happy people and they have positive energy. That's why I always try to be around happy, optimistic, positive people because I truly believe energy is contagious. So whenever people are laughing and smiling and happy, I'm just happy by definition.
We'll continue the conversation next week with Youssef, where we take a look at the hard lessons that everyone learned from the recent Iran war. We also turn our gaze at the kind of impact he wants to leave behind. Thanks for joining me today on What I Did Next. I'm Malak Fuad. This episode was produced by Shirag Desai. See you again next week.